Thanks everyone for coming to my talk. So today I will be presenting part of my research that I've been doing for my PhD program, which consists in exploring a Bayesian inference approach for the analysis of blue whale movement data. So the study of animal movement is of great interest in ecology, as it provides valuable insights in the spread of diseases within populations, environmental changes, and interactions between species. There are several methods that are used to collect animal positional data, such as global position systems or GPS collars, and animal-borne sensors, which could be accelerometers or acoustic transmitter tags. So the animal movement data usually takes form of data collected over time. The observations are taken at regular temporal scales, and at least ideally that's how people try to get them. There is a strong autocorrelation observed in the data streams, and this is due to the fact that animals tend to do the same behavior several times before switching to a new one. And as I just mentioned, observations result from an unobserved behavioral process. So effective modeling of this kind of data should be accounting for the strong autocorrelation to observed data streams, as well as incorporating features that represent behavioral states in animals. And for this, we have that hidden Markov models, or HMMs, are a good tool to model and analyze this kind of data. So an HMM is a doubly stochastic time series model, which is composed of an observation process, and such process is driven by a latent or hidden process. So in its very basic formulation, an HMM is defined by three components, which are the state-dependent densities, or in the ecology, these are usually called as emission distributions, transition probability metrics, and an initial state distribution. And these kind of models account very well for the strong autocorrelation in the time series. They also have the hidden process, which actually serve as proxies for potential behaviors. And as well, this kind of model gives an intuitive mathematical structure that matches with the biological intuition, and it's also possible to incorporate population and environmental factors in both the observed in the hidden process. And well, HMs have been used before, as I mentioned, in animal movement data analysis, and one of these examples corresponds to an analysis carried out by the Reuter et al., in which dives of blue whales were observed through an observation period for 37 individuals. And they also measured these dives with the whales being exposed to some sound stimuli, and their question of interest is to find if there's a potential change in animal behavior while whales are being exposed to these sound stimuli. And the authors show that there are three well-known main behaviors, which are near-surface traveling, shallow feeding, and deep feeding. And for the analysis, they opted they choose as a model a three-state mixed hidden Markov model, where the mixed part corresponds to having different state switching dynamics that may be depending on the environmental scenarios that whales could be facing. And they incorporated some exposure per dive as a covariate. So in the paper, the author explained that the logical surface of the selected model presents several local maxima. And to deal with this, what the authors did was to initialize their maximization method, since they used a frequencies approach to find the global maxima, and once they find it, they inference from that global node. And by doing this, they ignore all the other local maxima that were appearing in the logical surface. And so our goal is to replicate this analysis, but now from a Bayesian approach, to actually account for these multiple modes in the inference process. So from the different data streams that they had, because they had 7 different data streams to analyze, there is that the number of lunges, the maximum depth per dive, and dive duration characterize these main blue whale behaviors. So to start from something simple, we begin by fitting a basic 2-state and 3-state hidden Markov model with no covariates and no random effect, with the plan of increasing the complexity throughout our analysis. But as we were doing things, we just encountered several challenges. So for example, in this case, we feed a 2-state hidden Markov model only using the number of launches and maximum depth as part of the observer process. And for this, we run 40 chains using Stan. And what we had is that at least 20% of the transitions ended with a divergence. So we localized those chains that had this divergence, and we dropped them from out of the 40 chains. And from the remaining ones, we look at the output, and we were able to find two representative. We were able to find two regions that may be representing potential high-density areas. So these are the normalized log posterior of these areas that were found. And when we look at the emission parameter distributions of one of the data streams that were modeled, we find that we have different estimations for each one of these chains. So this may be potentially meaningful, biologically speaking. So far, everything is going well. And then we tried, instead of modeling with number of lunges and dive duration, number of lunges and maximum depth. Now we try to model with a number of lunges and dive duration. And again, we found these same issues with transitions ending with a divergence. From the 40 chains that we run, because we also use 40 chains, we had to drop these chains out of our analysis, and from the remaining chains, we only kept, we were able to find, again, 2 possible modes. And the results indicate that we maybe have found some areas of interest, biologically speaking. But when we increase our number of states to 3 states, again, using the number of plunges and maximum depths, there seems to be increasing the number of possible modes that appear in our analysis. And also the number of divergence increased by a lot. We had that at least 60% of our transitions ended with a divergence. So we had to drop half of the chains that we run. And the remaining chains that we had, we look at the output and we try to find these areas which could have a high density. So in this case, we found 5 areas that could be of interest. As we can see here, we have that there seems to be let's say, 2 modes that have very similar values. And what we find is that there seems that for the emission parameter distributions associated to the number of launches, there seems that the parameters for the state 2 and the state 3 are collapsing. Because one of the constraints that we set in order to not have this issue of level switching was to order this parameter. But given this, we have these 2 parameters that seems to have very similar values. And as a result, when we look at the emission parameters associated to the maximum depth, we have that those that corresponds to the highest normalized log posterior values. There are some level switching occurring for those ones, which are the chains that have the red color and the blue color. So in that sense, we are able to find possible areas of interest, but we are having some issues like model misspecification occurring, even if we try to set constraints to avoid that. And here in this case, we try to use the number of launches and dive duration instead of launches and maximum depth with 3 states. And again, in this case, we have that 60% of the transitions ended with a divergence. And we took out the chains that had this behavior. We only kept those that didn't have this kind of like behavior. And from the remaining chains, we found that there are 3 potential modes happening. And so when we look at the results, everything seems to be fine. Seems to be we're having like different estimations for each of the chains. Maybe for the emission parameter distribution associated to the state 2, we have some values that may be estimating the same for the chains. But so far, everything seems to be well. And the question that we were thinking is that Stan is able to find different regions, but with different chains, but we are not able to use a single chain to actually find those different regions. So we are thinking of a way of being able to explore different high-density regions, and for this, we thought about using state augmentation methods. And one of the very used methods for dealing with multimodality is parallel tempering, in which basically, instead of targeting our distribution of interest, in this case is the unnormalized log posterior, we target a distribution which is proportional to our distribution of interest times auxiliary distributions. And such auxiliary distributions are actually proportional to our distribution of interest, but to the power of a constant that ranges between 0 and 1. So ideally, these, if we use auxiliary Markov chains to sample from these auxiliary distributions, we'll get a good mixing across the entire space. And through a swapping operation, we will then pass this mixing information to aid for intermodal mixing in our desired target. So this is just a visualization of how parallel tempering works. So here we have that the lower the value of beta, or the closer the value for beta is to 0, we will make that the modes, like the gap between modes, will start to decrease, and this will help to being able to move around the different modes. And so the idea is kind of simple, but in the implementation, this is something kind of like challenging, specifically when we increase the dimension of the problem, like the higher the number of parameters we try to estimate, the more complicated it can become in terms of the performance. And from out of these 4 models, we were able to feed the parallel tempering and get some results for one of them, which is the one with 3 states, and when we're using the number of lunges and maximum depth. And as I mentioned before, for this model, what we had is that there seems to be some model misspecification, since we had that 2 states seems to be collapsing for one of the emission emission distributions. And we had like some problems there. But in this case, parallel tempering seems to be exploring these 2 modes that we had. And yeah. And so to conclude, there are like many challenges to overcome, and the next steps that we have in mind for our analysis. And as I mentioned before, there seems that some high density areas appear to be due to model misspecification, even for a very simple models such as a 2-state or a 3-state hidden Markov model. And even if we set constraints, we are still having a lot of divergence transitions and a lot of issues. And as I just mentioned, parallel tempering suffers from the curse of dimensionality. So the higher the number of parameters we try to explore using this algorithm, the performance will decrease. And in this case, I was only using 2 data streams, which would lead to have 21 parameters to be estimated. But if we ever try to incorporate the 7 data streams that the authors use in the paper, this will lead to have 51 parameters. So this just makes things more complex for implementing this algorithm. And as well, we will try to increase the model complexity by, I just mentioned, incorporate all the data streams that we are able to use, as well as to introduce the random effects that account for varying state switching dynamics in different environmental scenarios. And finally, include the covariates for well exposure to some stimuli, so we can finally get the model that the authors are presenting, and we are able to explore these different modes that they mentioned that they have. Thank you. Yeah.
You don't have to see the same hands all the time. Why don't you go, Paul?
Thanks for the talk. You talked about you have removed chains with divergent transitions, right?
Yeah.
Can you describe the chains a bit more? Were they completely like failing, or were they just some divergent transitions sometimes?
Oh, for some of these, when I look at the output for some of these, this would be giving like values that didn't make sense with the data, that we will have like very, very high values, because all of these parameters are non-negative, right? So in that case, I would be looking what was going on, and they would just give like 1,000, I don't know, 1 million as values, and that, yeah, wouldn't make like too much sense, at least in the biologically speaking, right? Like wells doesn't move like that fast. But yeah, that's kind of like, yeah.
Because I would generally be worried about excluding chains if they behave badly, because they may cover some relevant part of the posterior. Not in your case, presumably, but otherwise, some relevant parts of the posterior that we otherwise don't see, right?
Yeah.
But in this case, if you're just looking for certain local solutions that work, I think it could be sensible.
Yeah.
A bit dangerous.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, yeah, for now we just try to exclude that information, but it will be interesting to try to still accommodate for that behavior, understand like what's happening. Yeah.
If I can react a little bit to that. So first of all, I think it's cool you're running 40 chains. Because you're able to, maybe with 4 chains to miss some of these issues. But the bad side of it is, when you start running a lot of chains, you're oftentimes condemned to run into some of these issues. And I agree with Paul that we don't know what kind of bias we're introducing when we discard chains. I have to say that when you start plotting these log posterior densities into a different, maybe a formal way to try to justify discarding chains, maybe with things like stacking. Have you looked into that? Where the idea is you ascribe a weight to the different samples from different chains that's a little bit mindful of their different posterior densities. That said, this is the criterion here is really used for making predictions. So is that your ultimate scientific goal, or actually my question would be, are the different modes that you find scientifically meaningful? I know you said that sometimes it's just one of the specifications, but are there other cases where you find them?
Well, our goal is to eventually get to the complex model, which has mixed component. It has random effects and covariates that try to indicate whether wells change their behavior depending on these, like sound exposure. And what we try to do is like to get that model, being able to get the uncertainty from these other modes that were excluded in the analysis, and see if the inference process changes. Like maybe there is some local maxima that could give insight about what's going on with the whales. Or maybe there are like different parameter settings that could make sense, which how well behaves, and if that's the case, we are thinking about how can be interpreted, right, biologically speaking, and how can this be incorporated in the inference process. That's kind of like our ultimate goal. I mean, for now, we have like these other high density regions that appear that could be biologically consistent, but yeah, I mean,
okay.
Yeah.
And I think we have just about time for one more question.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah. So following up on that last one, Maybe it's sort of opposite the normalized, which is to get a simpler model running first and then add complexity, because it could be in this case that the complexity will actually break the multimodality, right? If you have ecologically relevant predictors that will help distinguish between the different hidden states, that actually might help convergence a lot, rather than starting with a base model and then building up.
Oh, so you mean like, what if we have the complex model, like, and if the modes disappear, you mean? Or how that's already?
Yeah, because if you introduce predictors basically that help identify what these different hidden states are, that actually might help these problems where you're trying to identify hidden states with basically very little information to distinguish between, it seems like.
Also, okay, so like having like more information about the wells will make that these modes just vanish, and we have. I mean, that's possible. That's possible. Yeah, I mean, like I've tried like getting the very big model to work. I mean, with only the 7 data streams and with no covariates and no random effects. But even with that model, we still have this multimodality, or like a lot of chains having like different like areas being explored. And yeah, I mean, if we incorporate like more complexity, yeah, our thinking is that that's gonna actually be increasing, not necessarily decreasing.
Yeah, that's why I was saying it's sort of opposite of common intuition to start simpler, because like those predictors actually tell the model what the hidden states are, rather than right now it seems like maybe there's just not enough information about what the states should even be. Whereas you add predictors, you can say, okay, like when this aspect of whale behavior looks like this, then this state is more likely. But anyway, it's just an idea.
Okay.
So the conversation can continue on that.
Okay. Thank you.